welcome. My name is Duncan Roy. I am an ocean rower and I'm a former Royal Engineer. So I am a Yorkshire boy, Yorkshire lad, born and bred. I grew up in the middle of North Yorkshire, and growing up I never did any sailing. I never really went to the coast at all really for anything. So my background is sort of more rugby and sports, that side of things, and I still to this day haven't really done much sailing at all, which might surprise you considering what the talk is about tonight and being on the Imray channel. I have actually done my RWA Yachtmaster theory, but I haven't actually done any sailing at all. So you might be wondering, well, how did I get into ocean rowing, considering I've not done much water sports at all in my life? Well, for me, getting into ocean rowing, I started off in the army. I was a Royal Engineer, as I alluded to already, and then I was injured on a training exercise about 5 years ago. And following that injury, as part of my rehabilitation, I got into indoor rowing, and that indoor rowing for me spiralled onto river rowing, and then that river rowing spiralled into ocean rowing. At the time, there was a very inspirational guy called Ollie Clark who I worked with. If you're watching Ollie, thanks very much for all of your support and inspiration all those years ago. And after seeing Ollie row across the Atlantic, it fully inspired me to want to follow in his footsteps. So having never done any form of rowing on the water, I decided to jump headfirst into that challenge, and this is a bit of an overview of my 2 Atlantic rows. So this is a section of the world map. As you can see, there's 2 lines on there. There's one in blue and one in red. So the blue line is my first Atlantic row, starting up here in Portugal, coming down to the Canaries, to the Cape Verdes, across to South America, to French Guiana. That expedition took 65 days. It was an extremely difficult challenge, both socially, technically. It was just an extremely hard challenge, and it was effectively learning how not to row an ocean. And that was December 2017 to February 2018. And then the red route that we have here is, the camera's reversed, so a bit hard to coordinate. But yeah, the red line there, that is the more popular Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge route from the Canaries to the Caribbean, which I did with 3 awesome mates called Team Row for Victory, and we did that in December 2018 to January 2019. And then following that, I was selected for Team Latitude 35, which is an American team you might have heard of, who are very well known in the ocean rowing world. And the plan was to row across part of the Pacific on what is known as the Great Pacific Race Route from San Francisco to Hawaii in 2020, this summer. So that was with an awesome team, skipper Jason Caldwell, who's American, in a boat which is called American Spirit, with 2 other teammates called Angus Collins, who's a very well-known name in ocean rowing, and then also Gus Barton, who is a personal trainer who does a lot of training of teams for ocean rowing. So that was the 4-man team. We've been training extremely hard, extremely well for this expedition. And then obviously in March, as everyone knows, COVID-19 happened. So with obviously COVID-19, that created a lot of uncertainty if the challenge was going to go ahead, but we were all training relentlessly to make sure that we were in the best shape physically and mentally to row across the Pacific this summer. And then unfortunately at the end of May, it was evident that we weren't going to get flights out to the US, and we had to make the call, and the expedition was cancelled. And it was a really crushing blow. I know everyone this year has been affected by the pandemic, and this one was sort of what affected us. And after putting so much training into it, it was a really hard thing to accept. So before admitting defeat, I picked up the phone and rang Gus, and I said, how do you fancy a bit of an extreme staycation and do something a bit closer to home? Because in effect, the only thing stopping us rowing across the Pacific was getting out to the US. So we thought, well, why can't we do a row a bit closer to home? So I rang Gus, said, do you fancy giving a crack at rowing around Great Britain? And straight away, he was like 100%. So picked up the phone, rang Angus, and Angus has already rowed around Great Britain a few years ago as part of the team. And he said, look, I will give you my full support as your weather router from like shore-based support. So that was it. It was perfect. It was all coming together. So this was the last week in May, and we were all very aware that we had a time limit on this expedition because Gus's brother was getting married on the 1st of August, and Gus was the best man. So we had to be back for that. So we've now got last week of May till the 1st of August. We've got about 9 weeks to pull this whole project from an idea into actually getting on the water, then doing the row and finishing it. So sounds pretty crazy, 9 weeks to do all of that, because you know, a normal ocean row, you're looking at 18 months to 2 years to pull together a campaign and an expedition like that. And then obviously the time on the water itself. So for us, we have a lot of thank yous to make for that, one of which is obviously Imray, hence why I'm on the Imray channel tonight, sharing my story with you all. Imray straight away came on board and provided us with all the charts and all the bits and pieces we need to make sure we had ready, that we were prepared, ready to go, so we could plan and execute the expedition. So thank you, Imray. Another massive shout out again to Angus Collins, who's our weather router the whole way around. Big shout out to those of you who supported us with kit and equipment to make sure that it was possible. That goes from Stu Morton, the boys at Hell on High Water, and also to the Seedlings. Without you, we wouldn't have had a boat and we wouldn't have been able to do the row, so thank you very much. A big thank you to Charlie Pitcher and the whole team down at Rannoch Adventure. Without you, again, this expedition would not have been possible. Absolutely amazing. We'll come on to Rannoch in just a moment. But yeah, fantastic. Thank you for all of your support. Another big thank you goes to Andy Hodgson, who's rode solo around Britain, for all of your support with tactical advice and some passage planning bits and pieces. Thank you very much for keeping an eye on us. And finally, to Barry Hayes, thank you very much for running our social media accounts whilst we were at sea, so we could share our story with all of the sponsors, supporters, followers to raise money for our 2 charities this summer. For those of the sponsors that I haven't mentioned, there are a lot to mention. Thank you so much to everyone who supported us to make it possible and everyone who donated to our charities. Okay, bit of an introduction to our charities. So we decided to do it for 2 amazing charities. With the pandemic, it was an obvious choice to choose the NHS charities together. So we rode in support of NHS charities together, along with another charity close to Gus's heart called Sport in Mind, which helps people with mental health issues through the medium of sport. And I grew to learn more and more about that charity throughout the expedition, and it's absolutely amazing. So if you haven't heard of it, you know, check it out. It is amazing. They do some incredible work, all in collaboration with the NHS. So check them out. They're super awesome. Big shout out to you guys. Okay, so onto the sort of more rowing side of things then. So I appreciate most people who are watching tonight are going to be sailors. So you might be thinking, what on earth is a rowing boat that you use for going around the UK or for rowing across an ocean? Cue the little cutout. Look at this. I've been busy with my creative skills, courtesy of Blue Peter, here who made it earlier. So this is what you call a Rannoch R25. Rannoch is the make of the boat. They make 4-man boats, solo boats, all sorts, and this is their pairs version. You can see it's got 2 rowing positions here and here. There's me and there's Gus. And we've got our stern cabin here and we've got the forward cabin over here. Fantastic boats. They pretty much hold most of the world records for going across oceans. And yeah, they're just absolutely brilliant. I've rowed both of my Atlantic crossings in R45s, which are the 4-man versions of these. As you can see on the top, we've got the solar panels. We've got water maker on board. We've got everything that you would expect to have on a sailing boat. So we've got EPIRB, PLBs, water maker, and we are completely self-sufficient. Apart from, we obviously don't have an engine, we don't have a backup engine, and we don't have any sails. Okay, so that is a bit of an overview of the boat. So comparing it to rowing across an ocean, so Gus and I, we had a 2-week lead-in to make this happen. Conceptually, the idea was end of May, and then June was executing the row, and we set off on the 14th of June. So 2 weeks to put it all together. So For us, planning-wise, it was massively important that we had the support of Rannoch with us and also Angus Collins to give us that support of what we were going to encounter along the way. But just to give you a bit of a flavour of what it entails, it was similar in the respect that it was fully unsupported. We weren't going to be stopping or getting any support around the way. And we would be carrying everything that we needed. Obviously on the ocean, it's very much more a process. So on the ocean, it's more rowing 2 hours on, 2 hours off, and trying to refine that process as much as you can to be as quick as possible and as efficient as possible. So in your 2 hours off, maximising your rest periods and all that good stuff. But round Britain, as we'll go into when I start unpacking the story, it is very much more like a game of chess about going from here to here, from this anchorage to this anchorage. What is the wind strength, wind angle? Is it wind against tide, wind over tide? Is it spring tides, neap tides? All of this sort of thing. So it's very much more tactical, a lot more to do passage planning, and it's just like a really difficult physical game of chess. Quite obviously though, on the ocean you've got the huge waves and swells that you don't get around the UK, but it's quite surprising how just a little bit of choppy current, whether that's wind against tide or just a headwind, can really stop you in your tracks, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Cool, so comparisons to sailing then. Obviously I've already said I'm not a sailor, I've not done any sailing before, so having spoke to a few friends who have done a bit of sailing to compare it for you this evening before we go into the talk, differences just to be aware of. Obviously we haven't got an engine. Our boat here, Lily, she's 7.1 metres long, and quite often, you know, we can't always row against the negative tides. You know, if you were going to sail around the UK, you might be able to tack out on the negative tide and then tack back in on the positive tide, whereas for us, you know, it is very difficult to row against the tide. Not impossible, depending on the strength of it, but pretty difficult. And yeah, so if anyone actually has seen the programme that's been on telly recently called Don't Rock the Boat, that will give you an insight into the boats. That was Rannoch who ran that expedition with 2 Rannoch R45s, which gives you a bit of a flavour of the challenges to coming up to rowing around parts of the coast of Britain. Obviously they didn't do the whole they were just doing sections, they didn't do the whole length of Britain. But it does give you a really good insight, and you know, those celebrities, I think they did well considering they were chucked in at the deep end, and knowing what the currents and those sections are like, it is extremely challenging. Okay, so there's a bit of an intro, and now onto the row itself. So I'm just going to have to shuffle around some notes during the talk because I want to make sure that I'm giving you guys all the right information. But effectively, we started in Ramsgate in England on the 14th of June 2020 at 6:45 p.m. and we were aiming to break the world record for pairs row around Britain, which was 41 days, 4 hours and 38 minutes. We had 45 days until Gus's brother was getting married, so that gave us an opportunity to break the world record, and if we didn't, we had a sort of 4-day fudge factor, if you like. So there you go, that was the plan, to try and do it around 40 days. So to start with, we were on neap tides. Neap tides, for those of you who don't know, are the weakest tides in the month, and it's all to do with whether the moon is. If anyone wants to know anything about tides, there's a really good video that Imray had a guest on called Will Thompson. I suggest giving that a watch. Really fascinating to understand how the tides work around the UK. So, neap tides, weakest tides of the year. We had light winds, they were headwinds, but they were southwesterly, which means the wind's coming from the southwest, and we were going to be heading down the English Channel. So we cracked on, and we had a really good start to our row. We were making really good progress. And to start off with, we were seeing lots of these little critters, these seals, which was really nice morale as we got going. Lots of nice company on the south coast from the seals. But in effect, how we were executing our rows, we were going headland to headland. So just like on an ocean row, we were just on a bearing, we were rowing as hard as we could, often 2 up. When I say 2 up throughout this talk, that means 2 of us rowing together. 1 up means 1 person rowing, 1 person resting. So we cracked on Dungeness to Beachy Head to Selzy Bill, into the Solent, and we were smashing it, feeling really good. We weren't getting much sleep because the weather conditions were so good, we wanted to capitalise on it. When we got to the Solent, we had a huge amount of support, and this was all within the first couple couple of days. So it was great morale right at the start, and we had other ocean rowers came out to see us from the granddads of the Atlantic, the bubbleheads, all inspiring. It was really nice to see you all, so thank you very much for coming out to see us. And then about 6 o'clock in the morning, we were in Poole Bay, so just west of the Isle of Wight, and we had the epic guys from Elliot Brown Watches and Pull the Pin Rum who came out to see us. These guys are both based down in Poole, and they came out on this rib at 6 o'clock in the morning in the complete, like huge amount of fog, like couldn't see anything, mist, and they just basically, we sent them our live location on WhatsApp of all things, and they just came out of nowhere, and it was just such a morale boost seeing those guys after only a short period of time, having not seen anyone, but just seeing those guys at that time was huge morale for us. So I'll stick those guys on there. So we're now just still rowing, like I said, headland to headland. So we get past Poole, we get to St Albans Head, boom, straight across to Portland Bill. We're just anchored now off the lighthouse on Portland Bill, so we've rowed 165 nautical miles in 72 hours, so we've been putting in a good shift. So we're there ready to go around Portland Bill and tackle Lyme Bay. So for those of you who're not really sure where these places are when I'm saying them, that's why we're sort of going along the coast. So we're just now here in Lyme Bay, this stretch, and it's 50 nautical miles straight across. I've just seen Gus there saying the Pull the Pin slipped down nicely as well. Yeah, so when the guys came to see us in Poole Bay, it was 6 in the morning, and we were trying to get some photos for them. They had Jem from Elliot Branch had this properly awesome camera, and we were there swigging this Pull the Pin at 6 a.m. Just after a really hard night shift, which is just what you want. So we were pretty tipsy going into that day. So thanks a lot for that, guys. So yeah, back to the story. When we were going from Portland Bill across to Start Point, it's 50 nautical miles straight across. We'd had our weather report in from Angus, and he said, guys, it's going to be a bit touch and go. You've got 13 knots, potentially 15 knots on the nose, southwesterly building in about 12 hours time. So you can either go around the bay or you can go straight across. And me and Gus, we were, really backing ourselves, feeling strong, put a lot of training in. So we thought, right, let's go for it. One bearing, Start Point, boom, let's go. So it was working well for us. We got halfway across, literally 25 nautical miles across, and then that's when things started to deteriorate. The wind just picked up to 18 knots, then 20 knots, southwesterly, straight on our nose. And the Resonant boats, they're fantastic mid-ocean when the conditions are with you, but when you've got 20 knots on the nose, it is extremely hard to row into those conditions. So we had to then divert course. We couldn't no longer go southwest. So the options were we either went back to Portland Bill, 25 miles, or try and tuck into the bay a little bit. So the nearest point of land was Dartmouth, 15 nautical miles away. And we just basically did the maths, and it was going to be 7 hours straight rowing to get there. So we just had to put our everything into it and go for it. And then the wind started to veer around, so it was again on the nose, and it just made it impossible to get to Dartmouth. So we had to come further into the bay towards Torquay. If you know the bay well, what I'm talking about. We ended up at a place called Brixton. But this was absolutely savage, both physically and mentally. The rain was continuous, and we were rowing into these headwinds, and the average speed just kept dropping and dropping and dropping. So every time you thought, oh great, 7 hours, right, mentally, I'm going to prepare to row for 7 hours, no stops. Then you do an hour, and the average speed dropped a little bit, so then you'd be looking at the deck repeat going, hang on, we've still got 7 hours to go. And this just kept happening and happening, and it was, in the end, 11 hours non-stop rowing. If you stopped to grab a chocolate bar to shove in your mouth, in that time, the oar tiller just couldn't keep you on course, and you'd have to then grab the oar again and keep pulling hard. And I just remember we had this Ed Sheeran playlist on, and it lasted, I don't know, for maybe 8 hours, on repeat until the speaker died. And me and Gus just swore we were never going to listen to another Ed Sheeran song again. So yeah, that was savage. And that humbled us, pulling in to Brixham and dropping our anchor after having not anchored, apart from for that brief hour at Portland Bill. It properly humbled us, that section. And that brings me to lesson 1 of my talk this evening. Lesson 1, which is, don't treat the coast like an ocean. So after that, we were having to just pay it the respect it deserves, the coast. and really crab our way around. So that's a term Angus Collins was using, which was to crab around, which meant rather than going boom straight across a headland, if the conditions were 50-50, we would have to take it conservatively, and we'll go into the passage plan side of it in detail a bit later. But yeah, effectively going 50 nautical miles across the bay in some questionable conditions was a lesson that we learned, and I wanted to share with you. Okay, so the next one, which is a similar sort of thing, but I just wanted to give, I think it highlights quite nicely the challenges involved in an expedition such as this. So you've got Plymouth, which is just down here, and next to it is a place called Nailsea Point. And if I measure that with my finger, it is literally the width of my finger, and you can see how big the chart is there around Great Britain. A C80 Imray chart, by the way. Thank you very much, Imray. So Plymouth to Nailsea Point. We were anchored up in Plymouth, just waiting for the tide to turn in our direction, and there was 16 knot headwinds, so a westerly coming through, and we were like, right, I don't know if we're going to be able to make this. And then we've got Angus Collins sent us the weather update saying, yeah guys, I don't know if you'll be able to make it, but I'll be really impressed if you do. So that was a red flag to a ball. We were like, right, we have to do it. So we popped our heads out and we just started grizzling away. And the only way I can describe it, to get through the wind that day, was like having two ice axes and just pulling yourself up an ice wall, just digging the ice axe in and pulling yourself up. And it was like that with the oars, pushing the oars back, digging them into the water, and then pulling them through. It wasn't like rowing, it was literally like dragging yourself through with the oars, like one stroke after another. It was completely savage. And the thing that me and Gus both struggled with the most, that we talked about, was our hands. And the reason for it was you're putting that much force down that if you slackened your grip off any less, your hands would slip off the oars. And quite often, as a common coaching technique in rowing, it's to try not to grip the oars very much, have a loose grip. But literally any less grip on that oar and your hands would have fallen off the oars, your hands wouldn't have actually fallen off. You know what I'm saying? But my point is after that 7-hour section from Plymouth to Nailsea Point, we both got in and dropped the anchor, and we were completely exhausted, and we just said to each other, we were like, that is the hardest physical challenge we've ever done. And Gus has done Ironmans, I've done a couple of ultras and bits and pieces, I've done my military training, and that was the hardest physical session for 7 hours that I've ever done. It was completely savage. And I just wanted to unpack that one little section, because you put that on the scale of going right the way around Britain. There's obviously too many to mention this evening. So I just wanted to explain just how the wind can affect you on these sections, and how it can be so challenging. And you could obviously just wait at the anchorage till the wind to be perfect, but it would take you forever to get around it if you were to do that. So you just have to go whenever you can, especially if you're trying to break a record. You have to just hammer it the whole time. And it really is relentless. But I'm talking a lot about like the hard parts. The south coast is beautiful. It is absolutely fantastic. And we saw so many special things and little bays. And then I started to think, wow, that's why people do sailing, because there's all these amazing places you would never know existed unless you were, looking at it from the coast. So it was truly fascinating. We had lots of nice support from people who were out on their boats this summer. Okay, so on the 24th of June at 0500 hours, we'd rowed 330 nautical miles, and we were 9 days and 11 hours into expedition, and we found ourselves at a little place called Land's End. And it was a big moment for us on our expedition, having completed the south coast. And I think, from a performance mindset perspective, you don't think about being up in Scotland when you're still on the south coast. That was the first goal, and to get there was massive. It was like, wow, we're on the water, and now we're already at Land's End, so let's keep cracking. Once we got around Land's End, we crabbed our way up to Newquay in Cornwall. And from Newquay, we made our break across the Bristol Channel from Newquay up to the southern point of Wales near Milford Haven. So it's about 80 nautical miles straight across. It was going to take us around 36 hours to complete. The weather was completely still. It was the hottest day of the year so far, which obviously creates its own challenges, but it was really nice, and we were really fortunate there weren't big winds, which was great on this exposed section. And one of the great parts of this story, on this day we were rowing away, super hot, just in the zone, you know, in our comfort zone, in the respect that we're away from land, just able to do a good routine of 2 hours on, 2 hours off, one person rowing. And then we had this little visitor, this Merlin helicopter from RNAS called Droits. They came over, they're based on the ships, and they're there designed for spotting submarines. And they'd seen us on a sortie earlier on that day, and the part of the briefing was to come and find us, pretend we were a submarine for their day's exercise. So that was really cool. They caught us on the VHF, and we said we obviously rowed around Britain for our 2 charities, and they did a couple of fly pasts, took some photos, and did like a really nice sort of aerial finish by coming in really low, which was super cool. And then that night, Gus and I were rowing, and we were kept company by these amazing dolphins. It was a huge pod. It was absolutely incredible, and nothing like I'd seen on the ocean. Like every time I'd seen dolphins on the ocean before, the conditions had been quite rough, so you couldn't see them very well. But because it was really calm, you could put your head torch on and see the dolphins through the water, and their reflection bounced back at you, so you could literally see right into the water. And they were really interested by the bow of the boat, and they were swimming around and making lots of noises and splashing. It was really, really special. I actually woke Gus up to see them, and I felt really bad about doing it, because obviously we were pushing it as hard as we could. But then, yeah, he was really chuffed when I woke him up, so I was quite relieved actually. So yeah, that section was phenomenal, and you know, you've got to think, we're not far, just off the coast, and seeing this amazing wildlife that better than any wildlife I'd seen, you know, any wildlife encounter that really had on the ocean. So this is one of the next stories about one of the hardest moments on the expedition, one of the most unexpected. And effectively what happened was, we'd just come out of the Bristol Channel, and then we were coming into the Irish Sea, just off the Smalls here, just west of Milford Haven. And what happened was, the wind was supposed to be coming in southwesterly to help us up the Irish Sea to get to our anchorage at the base around near St David's, to Nairn's Head. And effectively what happened was, the wind just came through as a straight westerly, and meant that we could not get round the Skoma Island. So in effect, as soon as the tide turned against us, we had no assistance from the wind, and it meant it was just us against the tide. And if anyone knows anything about the Irish Sea, the tide whistles up and down through there extremely fast. You know, you're looking like 3.5 knots of tide against you. So Gus and I found ourselves in a situation where the wind was coming through a lot stronger and from the wrong angle than what we were expecting. We were totally exposed, and the options were, again, to either go back for the next 6 hours and probably lose 25 miles and end up back in the Bristol Channel, or to drop our anchor. So what we ended up having to do, very suboptimal situation, was to anchor in 50 metres of water. And you might be thinking, well, what's the deal with that? What's the problem with that? Normally, you would only anchor maximum, really, 10 metres of water. And with that, you put out 3 times the length of line that you are in depth. So if you're in 10 metres of water, you'd be looking at 30 metres of line. Obviously, if you're in 50 metres of water, you need to put out 150 metres of line, which you think a football field about 100 metres. 150 metres, it's a huge, huge amount of line. And you know, the deck of our rowboat is very small. So very quickly we had to get our lines together. We fastened them together with these marine grade stainless steel carabiners that we had with us. Put the anchor together. We had various different anchors for different seabed types. And then we checked it all out, double checked it, and then that was it. Gus threw it overboard, and we just had this moment where we just saw it whizzing out, and it was just this nail-biting moment of, is it going to snag anything? What's going to happen is, and then eventually all the rope went out. We were really relieved. The line went tight. The boat got pulled into the tide, and then we were just watching the deck repeater and watching the speed over ground going from 3 knots, 2.5 knots, 2 knots, 1.51, not 0.50. We couldn't believe it. The anchor had just held us. It was fantastic. So we were there on anchor in the middle of the Irish Sea, very relieved, but now we were getting absolutely slammed every time these waves were coming through, and it was creating a huge, huge noise. And I don't know if any of you have experienced this in the sailing world before, but it was something that Gus and I didn't know what it was at the time, but we later learned from a friend called Simon Libby. If you're watching, hey Simon. And it's a thing called resonant frequency. And effectively all the energy and force that's coming through the water is hitting the anchor line and chain, hitting the boat, and all the energy has to go somewhere, and it comes out as noise through the boat, and it's called resonant frequency. And every time these waves and tides coming rushing through, the boat was just going, and then it would calm down, next one would come through, and the whole boat was just acting like a speaker. And it was unbelievable, just the force, the sheer force of that tide and the waves that were coming through, just a couple of miles off the coast of Britain. So we had to time it perfectly for the tide to go slack for us to get the line in, because it would be absolutely impossible to pull that in with that amount of force going through it. So using our Imray Tides Planner app, we knew exactly when that was supposed to happen. So at slack tide, we're both on deck, and we just had the biggest game of tug of war we've ever done. So we were sat sideways across the boat, and we literally, one of us go in, grab the line, pull it in, then the next guy would go in, grab it, pull it in, and it effectively took us 25 minutes to tug of war this anchor line in. We weren't sure if we were actually going to be able to get it back in to start with, but we managed to get it in, and we were just extremely fortunate. We were exhausted, covered in water, the rain, classic, started lashing it down, and that was obviously the start of our rowing shift to get to safety. It just was one of those where everything happened at once, and we had the Coast Guard on the VHF asking us how we were. You could see us on our AIS. For those of you that don't know what AIS is, that's Automatic Identification System. So they could see where we were, just asked us if we were okay, what our destination was, how many people on board. And it was amazing to know that they were looking over us. I think it's incredible, the Coast Guard and obviously the lifeboats, what they do here in Britain. It is truly, truly incredible. And for us to witness that, just that call, that VHF that went out to us was just an amazing feeling to know that they were there. But yeah, they said if you need us at any point, just give us a shout. But we were really hoping not to have to do it. And our destination that we're heading was only 8 miles away to a place called the Ramsay Sound. So if anyone knows where Ramsay Sound is, that inside Ramsay Sound is what we call the Bitches. And the Bitches create a huge amount of white water, which is internationally known for its kayaking, for whitewater rafting kayaking. So eventually we get into Ramsay Sound, and all the waves are crashing around the entrance of the sound. And the only way I can describe it is if you imagine a little rubber duck in a bath and you dropped a breeze block in there, all the waves, all the shock waves would reverberate out, hit the side of the bath and come back in, and the little duck would just be going crazy. And that's what our boat felt like. It was pitch black, it was 2 in the morning when we went in there, turned the head torches on, looked around, and the sea state was just violent. I've never seen anything like it. So Gus and I just thought the only thing we could do in that situation was turn the head torches off, because it was doing us no good looking at it. We just had to follow and trust the GPS units and the nav that we'd planned before we set off. And we were very fortunate to go past the Bitches without any dramas at 7 knots, and then fight really hard to punch out of it and then drop our anchor just behind St David's Island in Ramsay Sound. And we had to wait there then for 3 days for the storm to pass before we could carry on. Okay, so that leads me on to the next couple of stickers. So that's the anchor sign for dropping the anchor in 50 metres of water in the Irish Sea, tick. We've then got the danger sign, which was going into the Ramsay Sound past the Bitches at night. Everything that you shouldn't do in the almanac, we did. We'll get that on there. Boom. And then the Welsh flag, we got to Wales and we dropped our anchor, ready to wait out the storm. So yeah, amazing. And that leads me on to lesson 2, which is be prepared. And when I say be prepared, obviously we weren't expecting the conditions to do that. And obviously if you go out regularly around the coast of Britain, you're going to be caught up by the conditions at one time or another. And for us, the things that we were prepared of and the things we could control was having the lines stored neatly and correctly, and having the different types of anchors ready to go so we could react quickly to the situation. And that's what we did. So having all of those lines there ready to go and having the marine grade stainless steel carabiners so we could chuck it out was fantastic. Brilliant. And then, yeah, moving on, obviously, on that, just trying to find my notes for this section. Which leads me nicely on to passage planning. So obviously, as I've alluded to a couple of times, with passage planning so far, the importance of being prepared before you go out to sea is huge. And the things that we're looking for, if you're interested, as I say, you might think, well, what are these guys looking for when they're passage planning? So the key things for us, we'd be looking at our Imray Tides planner. That was huge, the app on our phone. We'd both be in the cabin as well. We had paper charts for the entire way around Britain. And you might be thinking, well, why are we using paper charts? But the thing was when you're looking at a map on your phone, avionics, or looking at the chart computer, you can only see so much, and it's quite hard to talk and get really in depth with it. Whereas when you've got a paper chart, you can really viscerally get on there, touch it, feel it. You can see things a lot better. So we would do a lot of our preliminary route planning on the paper charts. Then we would go on to the electronic charts from there on. And the sort of things we're looking for then on each little section is wind and gust strength, but also the direction. That has a huge impact on us as a rowing boat. And unfortunately, there wasn't many days that it was assisting us, I'll be honest. There were a couple, and I will mention them later, but predominantly it was either on our beam or on the nose, which made it extremely challenging. This summer, we had the incredible time during lockdown in March where it was really sunny, and that's when, we decided, right, we're doing this round Britain row after we'd had that amazing period during lockdown, and then as soon as we got out there, we had that great bit down the south coast, as I said, and then it just deteriorated from there. And anyone who's out this summer will know it was extremely challenging, and it was just sort of one storm after another. Okay, so we're then looking for available anchorages. So as we said before, you can't just go headland to headland if the conditions are peaky. You have to choose your battle, and it is like a game of chess. So if you are looking at the wind strength and the wind angle and thinking, okay, I reckon we could do maybe 22 miles on this next tide that's with us, you're then going to be looking for an anchorage to hit. Then you're going to also be looking for a backup anchorage somewhere in that section, and then you're going to have to do your speed, distance, time calculation to work out, well, if we're not there by a certain time, we're going to have to peel off an anchor there, because if you push on and you get to the anchorage that you're aiming for, and then you get caught out, you're going to end up having to go back to where you started, or have an absolute fight to fight the wind and the tide to get to your anchorage. It really is a war of attrition, but the planning is key, and that's why we're talking about passage planning. So, okay, as well to factor in is the strength of the tide. As I said, is it springs, is it neaps, is it somewhere in the middle? How strong is the tide? And then, as we said about wind angle, is it wind over tide or is it wind with tide? Which obviously, as you know, makes a huge difference whether it being choppy or not. Are there any hazards on that section? Is there any large shipping lanes, any rocky outcrops? Is there much cloud cover for the next day? Obviously, we're making water on board the boat, so if we've got that takes up a huge amount of power, and we're using the autotillers as well. So we need to make sure we've got enough cloud cover we've not got too much cloud cover, we've got enough sunshine coming through. So that's something else to bear in mind. And then water depths for anchoring options. As I said, 50 metres is very suboptimal for anchoring in. So realistically, we're looking for backup places to anchor if we get caught out. What's the seabed structure? Are we going to be using a fortress anchor? Are we going to be using a grapnel anchor? What's the likelihood of phone signal? Around Britain we're very fortunate to have good phone coverage, but there are sections, especially in the Irish Sea, where there is none, and that's when you might need to have the sat phone ready to deploy. And then obviously the almanac, the Bible, absolutely priceless. It's $49.99, but it's worth its weight in gold when you're going around Britain. Having a good almanac, so you can read up on all of the different marinas. Telephone numbers are all in there, all different lat longs for everything that you need. Little tips on how to go around Land's End at what time, and all this good stuff. It's amazing. And for me, finally, for Gus and I, having a weather router, having Angus Collins there as Overwatch, giving you those updates was just phenomenal. So thank you very much, Angus and Andy Hodgson, for all your hard work as well. Cool, awesome. So we're firing through, we're doing well. So we're now heading up the Irish Sea, and after that storm passed through, we finished sheltering in Ramsey Sound. We were able to make it up through Cardigan Bay and Carnarvon Bay, and it was absolutely fantastic. And we saw lots of these little fellas, these little puffins. It was incredible. And I don't know how many people who have seen puffins around the coast of Britain. If you have, maybe drop a comment in below. But they're amazing little birds, and they really do defy, you know, physics when they fly. They're just these tiny little birds with like quite a big body and really small wings, and yet they're flapping like really super hard to get off the water and swim. And fly. And it just used to make me think, was we were rowing away and having a bit of a hard time, you used to think, well, if those little birds can fly, you know, we can do this as well. So I actually used to get a lot of inspiration from those little birds in some of those hard times that we faced. But yeah, western coast of Scotland, of Wales was amazing. We came up past Anglesey and then we came across to the eastern side of the Isle of Man. And that is where we clocked our top speed for the expedition. We had some 30-knot winds at one point, just to get up and around this little headland to tuck in to a place called, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but in effect we hit 8 knots. And you might think 8 knots, you might be able to do that in your motorboat, no problem. But for us, we're averaging at most, 3 knots if you're lucky. So to hit 8 knots, we're absolutely flying on that section. From the tip of Isle of Man, we made our break across to here to the Mull of Kintaya, where we officially arrived in Scotland. So the Mull of Kintaya, if anyone knows, it's really, really phenomenal place when you get there. You start to get a feel for what Scotland's going to be like ahead, and the terrain is just different. It really is incredible. And from there, we actually experienced some huge overfalls off the Mull of Kintaya. So I'm going to put this little wave symbol. And I'm assuming a lot of you watching this have experienced overfalls. And it's as the tide whips around these headlands, it creates huge disturbance, standing waves in the water. And as we came around the Mull of Kintaya, we experienced some huge overfalls, and it was really exhilarating. We were reading the almanac and it said, take the inside line, but they really mean you need to be able to touch the shoreline to avoid it. There were massive overfalls there, but we just rode it out, put some power down, and we eventually got spat out the other side about 15 minutes later, which was really exhilarating. And just after that, we were greeted by these guys. Ooh, can you see that? These pilot boats, these Royal Navy pilot boats. This is HMS Biter, and they'd seen us, heard about what we were doing, thanks to one of my good friends and former rowing partners, Fraser Molan, and they came over to us, and yeah, it was amazing support. They offered us a care package, but obviously because we were fully self-sufficient, we weren't allowed to take it off them. But it was still awesome to see these guys and to get their support. We actually ended up bumping into them quite a few times around Scotland. So I'll pop those guys in there as well. Okay, the next one is a little bit around the coast, not many miles, just literally 20 or so miles away from the Mull of Kintaya. It's a place called Portpatrick. And Portpatrick will forever stay as a very special place in my heart. When we arrived there was a really big storm coming across Ireland, and we knew we were going to get smashed. It was like 30 knot average wind, gusting 45. So in our little boat, we knew we needed to get to some shelter. We looked in the almanac and we found the number for Portpatrick, and we got the number of a chap called Callum Curry. And it turns out that Callum Curry is an absolute legend. He's the chairman of the Portpatrick Community Harbour. It's the first community harbour in the UK, and effectively where the community bought their own harbour, a bit like when communities or villages buy their own pubs and manage it themselves, and they did this with the harbour. And we met this guy, and he was just an absolute legend, and obviously we couldn't get off the boat, but we were able to stay there in Portpatrick in a bit of shelter. And it was the day that the pubs reopened in Scotland, so we could just see and hear all of this cheer as everyone was getting to the pubs. And obviously it was, even though we couldn't join them, it was just a really nice atmosphere to sort of see, and people coming out to see us on the harbour wall. So really much appreciated everyone in Portpatrick. So for you, you get a love heart. And that goes in there, Portpatrick. just on the North Channel there between Ireland and Scotland. And I remember Callum Curry saying this thing to Gus and I, and he said, we've got a saying here, which is, if you can't see Ireland, it's because it's raining. And if you can see Ireland, it means it's about to rain. And he was just such an awesome guy. And I recommend, if you haven't seen it, there's a BBC documentary which talks about all the little fishing ports around the western coast of Scotland. And Portpatrick is featured, and Callum Curry is predominantly featured in it. And I recommend you watching it. Anyway, that's enough of me banging on about Portpatrick. So after Portpatrick, we headed up the North Channel to the Mull of Kintaya. The Mull of Kintaya is this bit that hangs off it's like, can you see that there? Yeah, it just hangs off from mainland Britain, and it is it's stunning, absolutely amazing, and the tide does whip round there pretty strong. But in effect, that was roughly just under halfway for us. So we decided when we got to that point to celebrate the halfway. So that brings us on to lesson 3, which is celebrate the small wins. And it's something that is very prominent in all of like the ocean rowing stuff that we've done and any endurance sport. If you just get to halfway and go, boom, right, let's go on 2/3, 3/4, you know, you're never going to be able to keep yourself motivated. Whereas if you get to these small checkpoints and then reward yourself, it's massively beneficial for your mental resilience and for general motivation. So using our pull the pin, which I talked about before, pull the pin, we were doing our pull the pin checkpoints. So halfway, we were having a little bit of pull the pin to enjoy the moment. And it just so happened that every time we were having these pull the pin checkpoints, it was like super early in the morning. We just felt like we were becoming pirates because we were just drinking rum at outrageous times of the day. So after Mull of Kintaya, we were then into the Sound of Jura, heading up to the Inner Hebrides. And from there, it was just absolutely amazing. Like the scenery was just phenomenal. But of all the amazing sights that we could see on land, one of the most incredible things that we saw was this starfish. That's not actually the photo I took, but it does the job. And that was on a little place called Giga Island in the Sound of Jura. And we got there, we dropped our anchor, and Gus was like, I can see the line going all the way down to the anchor. And we were in about 5 metres depth of water. And I looked over the side, and you could literally see the starfish on the seabed. And I know people say the water quality in Scotland is incredible, but I think that really does highlight it. And I know I keep saying how harsh some of these experiences were when we were rowing around Britain with the wind and the tide and everything else, but these moments where you see these really special things just made it all worthwhile. It was absolutely incredible. And then, as if we weren't lucky enough, just literally after leaving Giga Island, when we were going up the Sound of Jura, we saw a minke whale, which was absolutely incredible as well. So that goes on the map just there. Next up, in the adventure in the story is a well-known thing called the Gulf of Corryvreckan. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the Gulf of Corryvreckan. If you haven't, it is one of the biggest whirlpools in the world. And it effectively, as the tide gets forced through 2 islands between Jura and Scarborough, it basically, there's like an underwater feature that whips the water up in these huge standing waves and whirlpools. It's a really exhilarating place. And that was just up there. Because there was a westerly wind, 16 knots come through, we couldn't row through the Gulf of Corryvreckan, so we just had to handrail just around it. But we could see it, and it was just a really ominous place. Beautiful, but you can just really see how ferocious it would be at the wrong time if you didn't time it right with the tides. So from there we went up, instead of going through the Gulf of Corryvreckan, we went up through the Sound of Lewin. And the Sound of Lewin was again an amazing place. There's 3 little islands within this sound. And when I say a sound, it's effectively like a channel. And the water, as you can imagine, is getting absolutely flung through there, like 7 knots. And as it hits these islands, it creates these whirlpools and eddies. And it was just absolutely mental. You would be rowing away, and the boat would just start getting turned, and then you'd be getting turned the other way, and you're still doing 7 knots. And as I say, you know, our top speed would be 3 knots on it if we were doing well before, and then you're getting flung 7 knots sideways past the lighthouse. It was just absolutely incredible. So there we go. That was the Sound of Lewin, just past Corrie Wrekin. Okay, so after the Sound of Lewin, we approached Mull, and if you've heard of the island of Mull, it again is stunning. Hugely mountainous island, absolutely amazing. And as we approached it, we were just really excited to get into the Sound of Mull, past the McLean Castle, and just get up there, and it looked so sheltered. But actually what happened was, as we got around Mull and into the Sound of Mull, the angle of the wind, which is what I talked about earlier, about how it can really catch you out, it was going to be channeled right down the Sound. So the mountains were just channeling that wind, which wasn't super strong, but it was just enough to get right down and really pick up the sea state. And the Sound of Mull, if anyone's been up there, it's literally, it looks just like a river because of how narrow it is. But you've got the tide going through there, not very strong, but you like I said, that wind can really chop it up. And it was effectively like meeting a brick wall. We just could not get through it. It was just impassable. So we ended up having to anchor in a place called Ardentish Bay. And it was just a real kick in the teeth because we were really trying our hardest to just push and push and push. And after some really good days and after a few hard sections, we just thought, you know, you haven't heard of the Sound of Mull as being a really challenging section. You hear Gulf of Corrie Wrekin being challenging, and we navigated it well. And then you come to the Sound of Mull and it catches you out, and we ended up having to be on anchor for 36 hours, which was really frustrating. You know, for us on anchor, it's not a pleasurable experience. You know, that means that the conditions are bad if we're on anchor, and we're effectively just getting thrown around in that little cabin. And you can't just switch off. You can't just go, okay, or I'll just go to sleep for 36 hours. You're constantly aware that the anchor might drag or something might happen. So you can never, ever switch off. You're never out of the fight. No one's there cooking you a meal or looking after you or whatever, or get a shower. You're on that boat the entire time, completely isolated, just with your own partner, with Gus. And it was really, really tough. So yeah, that was a real shift in our morale from being really high to quite low at that moment. And every time the tide turned in our favour, we tried again, but the wind was just made it impossible. But after 36 hours, we tried again, and we were able to punch through and made it up to Tobermory, which was beautiful, absolutely amazing place, and recommend going if anyone ever fancies it. So after Tobermory, we passed the most western point of mainland Britain, which is called Ardnmarkin. Apologies for the pronunciation. I'm just going to put that anchor symbol in for Ardentish Bay on the Sound of Mull, which caught us out. Sorry, I've just missed the point. But yeah, my point being that just rewind slightly, anchoring in Ardentish Bay brings me on to lesson 4. And lesson 4, which is expect the unexpected, because like all the revered sections of, like I say, the Gulf of Corrie Wrekin or Land's End or Portland Bill, those are the sections that are really revered. So you give them the respect they deserve, and you approach them so. But it's the little parts that aren't revered, like I said before, Plymouth to Nails's Point or the Sound of Mull. These little places that aren't revered, that can still, if the wind or angle or whatever just isn't quite right, can really catch you out. So yeah, lesson 4, expect the unexpected around Britain for certain. Past Ardnmarkin, which is the most western point of mainland Britain, which is just up here. And that for us was one of the best days. It was absolutely stunning. So you go past the islands of Rum and Egg, and you've just got these beautiful, beautiful views of all the mountains up in the western coast of Scotland. It was fantastic. And there was a group of guys who were out on this rib, and they were going out to see the basking sharks with all their scuba diving gear on. But they'd actually heard about us coming and knew that we were going to be rowing past at some point that day. So when they saw us coming, they got out the water, got the bagpipes out and came over to us and bagpiped us past, which was so special. Really, really was cool. And they were friends with the Braw boys. If you're into ocean rowing, you'll know about the Braw brothers, the 3 brothers who successfully rowed across the Atlantic in the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge last year and broke a lot of world records. Really cool guys, and they were friends with those guys. So thank you very much for coming out to see us. And for that, and putting some bagpipes on the chart. Cool. After that, and there's some of the views that I'm going to now put on the chart as well, that I told you about, the amazing views. And from there, we made our way up through to the Kyle of the Cache, which takes you to the Sky Bridge, which is absolutely phenomenal. And that marked one of our big pull-the-pin checkpoints. We're really looking forward to rowing under the Sky Bridge. Just a really big moment if you're doing a circumnavigation. So we celebrated with some pull-the-pin, and guess what? As standard, it was like 9 o'clock in the morning, drinking rum, true pirate style. Okay, what have we got next? So, so from there we had a bit of a tough run up to Cape Wrath on the northwestern point of Scotland. Just trying to find the notes for the section. Yeah, there we go. And yeah, it was pretty tough going. There was wind just on the beam, westerly, pretty strong, gusting, up to 20 knots. But we were able to make progress, which was fantastic. We knew we were sort of starting to get up against it with the time frame that we had, so it was great that we could push on up to Cape Wrath. And we did promise, I would say, when we got some favourable weather, and this is it, this is when we got our weather, and granted, we didn't have it in the Irish Sea, we didn't have the best weather. However, another section you want good weather if you can, is on the most northern point of Scotland. And we were so fortunate as we rounded Cape Wrath, where the Atlantic Ocean meets the North Sea. We had this huge swell just rolling in, like what Gus and I've seen a lot of on the ocean, and it was just rolling straight across the north of Scotland there. And we had the wind with it as well, and it just took us straight across the top of Scotland. And it's 63 nautical miles roughly from Cape Wrath to Duncansby Head, otherwise known as John O'Groats to a lot of people. And 63 nautical miles, we did it in 24 hours. We absolutely smashed that section, and it was just so nice to have the wind with us for a short period. But yeah, on that northern point of Scotland, it is barren up there. Beautiful, but it is barren. There's not a lot going on, and we hadn't really seen much civilization for a while. And I remember it was like coming up to sunrise, and we saw all these lights on the coast, and we were getting really excited that there was a town right in the middle of nowhere on the northern coast of Scotland. We were like, wow, when the sun rises, we're going to be able to see this town, it'll be amazing. And then the sun rose, and it was a huge wind farm on the land. So we were like, oh, still no civilization, which is quite funny. Anyway, eventually, on the 16th of July at 12 p.m, after 32 days of rowing and 1,010 nautical miles, we reached Duncansby Head, aka John O'Groats, which was, again, as you can imagine, a huge moment to be finally heading south. Pointing the nose of the boat south was just phenomenal. But our elation soon wore off, because as we rounded Duncansby Head, we had a huge headwind, which was not forecasted, and it was like 20, gusting 24 knots on the nose, and we thought, there's no way, there was absolutely no way we're going to be able to row against this, but we just thought we're going to have to try, otherwise we're going to end up in Denmark. So we were rowing as if our lives depended on it, and just amazingly, there was this tide that was just carrying us round Duncansby Head, down this section of coast, down to Prestwick Bay. And Prestwick Bay was like our backup anchorage. We really wanted to get down to a place called Wick. But we were then just thinking, wow, if we can make it to Prestwick Bay, we'll be really happy. It's amazing how your perception soon shifts. And it was on no charts that we saw, but there was this current that just took us the whole way there, and without it, guaranteed we would not have made it in. It was just one of those moments where, I don't particularly find myself as being a hugely religious person. I am Christian, but at that time, I really was sort of talking to God and just asking him to please just help us out. We were just so on the limit at that point, mentally and physically. It was so tough. And to get into that Prestwick Bay, we were both completely exhausted, and we just collapsed getting into the bay, threw the anchor down. We were just elated but exhausted. yeah, there you go, amazing, but carnage, absolutely savage. So from there, we were basically doing our speed, distance, time calculations, and we worked out from Prestwick Bay, where we were, down to Ramsgate, it was 550 nautical miles to go, which would equate to 40 miles per day, because we only had 2 weeks left until Gus's brother was getting married and Gus was best man at his wedding. So we knew it was still on, the game was still, everything was still to play for, but it was going to be really fine. We had to make sure we were making good miles. We had to pray to get some northerly wind to help us down south. And unfortunately, it just didn't come. We just had some really unfortunate winds, which meant that we had to anchor in a little place called Libster Bay on the northern part of the Moray Firth. And this wind was just coming in from the east, which just meant that it was really stunting our progression to get across the Moray Firth and east to Fraserburgh. It was really, really challenging. Obviously mentally now, knowing that every day that we were on anchor was just then eating away at our opportunity to actually finish this expedition. And we came to terms at that point that the world record was definitely off, obviously, but could we at least finish and get to Ramsgate before our time ran out? And it was just morale sapping every time we looked at the forecast. It just didn't seem to be with us. And then the whole way down this eastern coast past Aberdeen, we were just getting headwinds, or just anything other than a northerly. It was just savage. It really was savage for having to do short legs, really crabbing our way around and just grizzing our way through every little section. But again, we kept persisting as hard as we could to try and make our way as far south as possible. And yeah, eventually we managed to make it down into England. So I'm just going to put it on the map. Here we go. Boom. So yeah, eventually we'd made it down. We'd come across the Firth of Forth. Really tough section, coming past Dunbar, Eyemouth. And then when you got past Berwick-upon-Tweed, we were in England again, which was a huge morale boost, knowing that we'd now got back round and into England, having been right around the top of Scotland. But we knew time really wasn't on our side, so we were just trying now to find the best place to finish, which was a real shame, having gone all the way around, knowing that we weren't going to be able to finish, having had all of this bad weather and adversity, and cracking on through it and not being able to finish, we knew was going to be deeply disappointing. And just in true form of our expedition, when we were hoping to maybe finish in Hartlepool or Scarborough, we ended up getting some really strong offshore winds that meant we had to anchor in a small bay just north of Amble called Embleton Bay. And that was a real kick in the teeth. It was 2 full days we ended up having to anchor, and we were just getting chucked around in the boat like it was a washing machine. It was really tough. And we had some good friends of ours at the time, Exeter Enduro, who were rowing at the same time, and they were pretty much on the other side of the country experiencing the exact same winds, just on the northern part of Ireland. They'd made it over to Ireland as they went up the Irish Sea. So we were actually on the phone to those guys and just sharing some of the stories, and it was great to go through that with those guys this summer. But yeah, from there it was just obvious that we had to make it to Amble to finish our expedition. So on the 29th of July, having rowed 1,279 nautical miles, after 44 days, 18 hours and 2 minutes, we finished our round Britain row in Amble Marina in Northumberland. Up here, let's see if I can stick that on there. Cool. So it was a real mixed bag of emotions. You know, it felt like it finished very suddenly, and it was very raw. You know, after mentally preparing yourself to finishing down here and putting everything into it for 7 weeks, and then ultimately finishing very shortly was hard to accept. And it was, you know, neither of us really felt like we got the closure that we wanted or deserved. And having been through that with Gus and gaining, you know, brother for life through all of those things we went through, it was still hard to accept what had happened to us after getting through 82% of it. But however, we did stop for the right reasons. We always had our goal in mind, and it was incredibly important for Gus to get to his brother's wedding, obviously. However, this comes on to the last and final lesson, which is lesson 5. And lesson 5 is never ever give up. So, lesson 5, the very next week, or maybe 2 weeks later, was the 12th of August, so yeah, 2 weeks after finishing, Gus returned to Amble on his bike. And he rode, so he took the train from London up to Amble, and he rode an incredible 550 miles down to Ramsgate. So I'm just going to put that on the map. Pretty roughly, but there you go. That is the exact route. I'll just put it on very well. But yeah, so Gus then cycled 550 miles over 5 days to complete his human-powered circumnavigation of Great Britain. And bearing in mind he was averaging, over 100 miles a day, and he'd only been on dry land for less than 2 weeks, is absolutely phenomenal and just shows his mental strength. And he was ringing me up saying to me, mate, this is incredible. We don't have to worry about headwinds or anything, like a bit of headwinds and rain, whatever, it doesn't matter, but on the boat, it was just such more of a big task for us. And for Gus to just casually crack out 550 miles on his bike just was crazy. For me, I had so much work to catch up on with my ocean rowing teams for this year's race. So I was out back on the water a week after finishing in Amble on the south coast. So unfortunately couldn't join Gus on the bike. So the next available opportunity for me to put this to bed, and after hearing about all of Gus's amazing closure from the expedition, was for me to get on my indoor rowing machine and do a 4-day erg. So I did a 4-day erg, which to finish the remaining 283 nautical miles along the coast, which equates to 524,160 metres, or 12.4 marathons. So I rowed like we would on the ocean, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, and finished on the 9th of October at 8:21 in the morning to join Gus virtually where we started, down in Ramsgate, to finish off our circumnavigation. And when I say lesson 5, never give up, that was because it gave us a huge sense of closure and achievement getting back to Ramsgate and really feeling like we put that expedition to bed. Obviously we would have loved to have rowed in there, but it was the right decision for us to finish when we did. We made the right call at every stage on the way around, I feel, on reflection. And it gave us the opportunity, by doing those 2 extra expeditions on the bike and on the indoor rowing machine, to raise more awareness and more funds for our 2 charities, the NHS Charities Together and Sport in Mind. And we were very fortunate, so thank you again to all of our sponsors and supporters. We were able to raise a staggering £15,240.48. Thank you very much. And one of the most amazing things that came out of this whole project in this row was that 6 people who were following our project reached out to Sport in Mind for help because of the services they'd heard about through our row. So that meant the most out of everything. And I urge anyone who is having a tough time at the moment to speak to someone if they need to reach out. November, it's what this is all about, suicide prevention. So if anyone is having a hard time, just speak to someone, okay? Brilliant. So that's it. That is my Round Britain row in a nutshell. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've been able to take something from it, and I hope I've been able to do it justice. It was a very big part of our lives this summer, and I've been really looking forward to sharing it. Okay, so if anyone has got any questions, I'm more than willing to do a Q&A. I know I've been talking for a long time, so I appreciate you might all be wanting to get off and watch I'm a Celebrity or whatever it is that goes on at this time. Oh, cool, thank you, some really nice comments coming through there. I'm just going to have a drink of water. Okay, questions coming through, let's have a look. How do we cope with the seasickness? Yeah, that's a good question. So, I was seasick on my first Atlantic row, and back in 2017, and I took cinerazine tablets, otherwise known as Stugeron, which I don't know if it actually helps the seasickness, but what it does is it makes you feel drowsy, and I think that then means that when you are in your off periods, you're more likely to sleep rather than getting stressed and all the rest of it, rather than sitting up and getting agitated. So when you are off, the best thing you can do is lie down and sleep. So for us, on that first expedition, taking the tablets just helped kickstart that process. But after that first expedition on training rows, touch wood, I've been okay, I've been fine. So on this one, Gus and I are very fortunate we didn't have to take anything. I think Gus just wore some patches. If you want, there's some prescription patches you can get called Scopoderm, which are quite popular. Whether they're placebo or not, I don't know, but they're prescription, so I'm assuming there's obviously some active ingredient in there, and obviously works for some people. But yeah, very fortunately, neither of us were sick at all. But yeah, good question, thank you. Katie, do we have any plans to try it again? I wouldn't say no, but I wouldn't say at the same time that we've got any immediate plans in the timeline. Looking back on it, it really was the adventure of a lifetime. It was, you know, harder physically and mentally than both of my Atlantic rows, for all the reasons that I've given. It was extremely challenging, but yeah, so rewarding. You know, doing that with Gus, you know, I have a brother for life there, and looking back to create this talk, looking back through everything and getting looking at all the pictures and the logbook and everything, just brought back so many good memories. And it was only a few months ago, so yeah, I wouldn't say no, but it would be nice to finish off what we started and complete the full circumnavigation on the boat. Let's have a look, any questions? Katie again, what was the mental challenge harder than the obvious physical challenge? I mean, yeah, you can't deny the physical was savage this year, and it is on any ocean road. It physically is relentless, but yeah, the mental does take over, especially on those shifts, like you said, you know, in that first section we talked about from Plymouth to Nails, just that 14-mile stretch was such a mental battle, and those sections where your average speed is dropping and your distance remaining isn't going down very fast, so your ETA just creeps up and up and up. So to mentally just keep recalibrating to go, right, I've still got 7 hours to row, yeah, it's a huge mental challenge. So I would say, yeah, the mental challenge around Britain is harder than the physical, without underestimating the physical, because it was extremely physically demanding. Arvid, many thanks to me. Thank you for your kind comments. Another great question from Katie. You've got some great ones there, thank you. As you were self-sufficient, was there anything you hadn't packed that you wished you had had? Oh, I don't know. I'm sure if Gus was here, we'd be able to brainstorm a couple of ideas. Trying to think, we were very fortunate with the rations that we had. We've got our rations from lots of different companies, thanks to the Seablings and thanks to Activate. So from a food perspective, actually, we were actually fine. I'm just trying to think if there was anything that we were really missing. I don't think so. I think we pretty much had everything that we needed. Thank you. Oh, thank you for all the lovely comments coming through. I really appreciate it. Laura Try, when's your next adventure? So the Pacific Row with the very high profile team, Latitude 35 team, has been postponed, so it's now on for next summer, June 2021, in the Great Pacific Race. So if anyone wants to follow us through that, search for Latitude 35 or head to my website, rowanroy.com, and there's information about it on there. Marcus White, who I do a lot of cycling with, when are we doing the Round Britain ride? I don't know, mate. If you do the nav, I'll just follow you, mate. Every time we go for a ride, you're always the one doing the navigation. So I guess if you just take us round, I'll follow you round. James Baston, hi Duncan. Why did you choose to row from Ramsgate and not Octobridge, where the current pairs world record is set from? So we decided to set off from Ramsgate. We were obviously having our advice from our weather routers, and that was the best place to set off for our expedition. Thank you very much. Who else? Any other questions? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the nice comments. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for tuning in and for listening to my stories, adventures and lessons learned from rowing around Great Britain. Take care.